Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFR Let's Talk panel. Equinix Metal is focused on building an open partner ecosystem around Kubernetes instead of kind of building their own managed Kubernetes services. And today we have a great panel with some esteemed guests from the Equinix partner ecosystem. We have with us once again Sirish Raghuram, CEO of Platform 9, Mohan Atreya, SVP of Product and Solutions at Rafe, Narayan Sainane, CTO of Code Zero, and once again, Mark Coleman, Senior Director of Developer Relations at Equinix Metal. Welcome to the show. Mark, we had a great discussion last week where we talked about Equinix Metal's focus on an open ecosystem around Kubernetes. I want to reiterate that vision once again. Why is Equinix working on building a partner ecosystem instead of your own managed Kubernetes services?
Essentially what it comes down to is we think that other people are better at this than we are. And as we're moving, just hybrid and now things like interconnection, which are making this much more of a horizontalized market. And because it's a horizontalized market, it makes more sense for us to stay in our lane and then work with, the incredible smart people at all of our partners, some of whom are here today, where they're focusing on what they're best at too. And the combination of those, we think, is likely going to be better, not only for supporting companies in our ecosystem and for future innovation, but also, of course, for our customers.
We have hosted both Rafe and Platform 9 before, but this is the first time we have Code Fresh on our show. So I would love to learn a bit about the company. So Narayan, can you tell us, what do you folks do?
What we're really focused on is making developers' lives a lot easier. Kubernetes has a pretty steep learning curve. And when we look at setting up Kubernetes, everything from setup to development to deploying your payloads and then going all the way through to even operating Kubernetes, there's a fair bit that organizations have to learn. So we see that there's a timing for this next tier of tooling that is going to help cross the chasm, reach the next group of developers that are not infrastructure experts, who are not experts at things like load balancers and so on and so forth, getting right into being able to write software for Kubernetes. So that's where we're here to help.
Sirish, I have been covering Platform 9 since early OpenStack days, so bare metal has always been a topic of discussion between us. But let's talk about bare metal and Kubernetes equation.
I think, look, here's something really interesting that happens with bare metal and Kubernetes. For a long time, people have looked for more open alternatives to the cloud, right? More freedom and more flexibility with the cloud. And what happens with bare metal and Kubernetes is that if you think of, is Kubernetes clusters, are they running in the cloud, or is the cloud running in a Kubernetes cluster? And I think if you think about running like Kubernetes in a cluster on bare metal, one of the things we've been thinking about for a long time is how do we deliver an experience where people feel like they have a complete cloud experience, but in the cluster. So not clusters in the cloud alone. Yes, you can run Kubernetes clusters in the cloud, but how do we also deliver an experience where you can get a full cloud experience from a cluster, which happens to be running on bare metal, which has lots of use cases, right? Like you can get better price performance, you can locate that infrastructure in specific regions, you can get better economics out of it, right? So we think that this is incredibly useful, and we have some joint customers with Equinix Metal. We ourselves were a very early customer of Equinix Metal before they were acquired by Equinix. So there's a lot of use cases for this, and we're very excited to be a part of this ecosystem.
Mohan, you folks just raised another round of investment. Congratulations. Let's use this opportunity to share with our viewers, what do you folks do and what is your vision for Kubernetes operations?
We looked at this slightly differently, at least we hope, based on what we're hearing from customers. So we try and solve the problem of streamlining the lifecycle management of both the clusters as well as the applications for companies. Why is this a big deal? So it's a big deal because in today's world, organizations don't just have a handful of clusters. They like to get closer to users. They like to deliver applications with great performance. To do this, an average organization would have clusters on premises, on things like new services like Equinix Metal, which help them bring their services closer to users, could be on the public cloud, and hundreds of edge locations. Managing all this can be a nightmare operationally for people. We try and help streamline that whole thing for them. And we focus on specifically 4 problems: automation, how do I get all of this up and running quickly and efficiently and keep the lifecycle going? Visibility, when I have both clusters and applications in all these various places, how do I know what's going on, right? Visibility. And then you can't do all of this, and fly by the seat of your pants. You need to have security and governance, right? So we also make sure that these four items are taken care of at scale, all through a single pane of glass. That's kind of our current mission. Hopefully that clarifies. Yeah.
Mark, what an excellent panel we have here. If you look at these three players here, they are solving different problems. They have different stories, but there is a common theme as well. So from an Equinix Metal perspective, how do you look at these partners? They're trying to solve different problems for different users, but they are relying on Equinix Metal. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you're right. There's many more partners, of course, just came on in this recent press release, and they do all have different characteristics. Some of them are very specifically good at one thing, and they need to be assembled with other partners to be able to be useful. Some of them, like Suresh was talking about a little bit earlier, they really kind of bring it. It's almost like they're in our ecosystem, and then they bring their own ecosystem with them. And it takes a different type of enablement. So one of the things we've done outside of, interfacing with all these companies and bringing them into the ecosystem, we've also built out an entire team focused only on this, led by the very talented Josh Krams. There's 5 people in there: Masood Nouri, James Leverton, Shion Blackman, Eric Rosa, and Ed Mehdi. And they're trying to figure that out right now, because there's kind of two sides to it. Like, different partners have different levels of enablement, but what it needs to come down to at a certain point is, saying, voila, here's 25 partners, doesn't necessarily help the customer that much, because it just means now they have to go and understand all these partners. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to be like a concierge for the partner options that we have. Like, it sounds like based on your needs, you might combine the partners in this way. So there's a bit of a sort of pre-sales thing in there that we're going to be leaning into to make sure that basically everybody gets the maximum value, out of being a part of the ecosystem.
Mark, when I look at the use cases and these players here, I cannot stop comparing this to Linux kernel, where different users, different players were bringing solutions to their own problems, but they made Linux better for everyone else. So how are these use cases, these players, these partners are, while trying to solve their own problems, are also making Equinix better for everyone else? So how do you look at this?
I think the theme that's tying all of this together, is there's many different ways to look at it, but I think the one that's tying all of this together is still the horizontalization of the cloud model that I've been talking about for a while. For the longest time, if you're over at Amazon, they have these incredible products and everything is managed. It's very much like having an IBM mainframe in 1988, right? Like, everything is verticalized. And now what we're starting to see, as you pointed out, so you could be running Intel chips in there, you might be running AMD chips. And then you move up a little bit, you've got a whole host of different operating system options. You move up a bit more, we've just introduced 15 different ways to do Kubernetes. And of course, innumerable permutations of how you could combine those. And on top of that, you've got different support models. So I think really it's like, it's actually already a problem we're aware of. It's a solved problem, which is how do you make customers successful in a horizontalized market? And the way you do it is by consulting them a lot. I think it's just like, back in the day, as we moved into IBM PCs, suddenly I'm like, who's selling me my chip? Who's selling me my memory? Who's selling me my motherboard? Who's selling me my case, my power, my screen? Like, somehow helping our customers to negotiate that complexity is definitely a challenge here. But I still think, even though it's challenging, it's the right way to go.
Mohan, you're talking about lifecycle management, and you also mentioned 4 problems. Can you share how does Equinix Metal help you solve these 4 problems? And also, of course, let's talk about lifecycle management as well.
One of the common problems we keep hearing from organizations, I kind of touch on what Mark was just alluding to, they're very quickly divesting their on-premises data center resources, and they need a viable alternative. And many of the applications are not yet well suited for an extremely virtualized environment, etc. So they need to run this on a bare metal kind of a service. Now, the economics of them having to build out a large data center, and not just one, in many cases, they are global companies, they need to service the users in 20 different locations. And not only that, they also need amazing interconnects across these data centers because data is being backhauled back and forth, etc. So it's a build versus buy decision for these customers, and the economics are obvious that they should be looking at something like Equinix Metal. Which is kind of why we're excited to partner with Equinix Metal, because we see organizations making that shift, asking for something like that, and we think this is a fantastic option in the market for at least our customers. On top of it, I kind of pick on an interesting, extending what Sirish just mentioned, which actually is a fascinating use case we're seeing in the market, which is kind of turning the whole model upside down. On bare metal, with Kubernetes underneath the covers, you can actually, applications teams can actually run both VMs on Kubernetes and containers on Kubernetes. That is a fascinating trend we are seeing in the market today. Of course, VMs on VMs are not going to be great, as we all know, but running VMs on Kubernetes and containers on Kubernetes. So I now have a unified management plane for both my legacy applications and my modern applications. I mean, that's a state most enterprises are in. So no one's 100% containers yet, unless you're a startup. So that is something we see again and again with big enterprises. So we're very excited to partner with Equinix.
Sirish, you were talking about cloud native-like experience on bare metal. I may be totally wrong, but I think cloud native is more or less way of doing thing versus a thing in itself. So let's talk about how does Equinix Metal help you bring that cloud native experience to bare metal so that your customers can leverage all these technologies while also leveraging bare metal.
Yeah, I think so. I think Swapnil, we talked about this in the past, right? Like that cloud itself is a philosophy. Cloud native is a way of architecting and operating applications and consuming infrastructure and with consumption, right? Like in a very dynamic way. What Equinix does is really interesting to us because it gives us a programmable fabric that very few other companies in the industry have actually done a really good job of, right? They give you they allow us to consume compute, like physical CPU, memory, storage, network, in a way with a programmable fabric, which we can then take in our layer and then expose up for consumption through all the richness of the Kubernetes API and the operators and the application services, everything from databases to message queues and storage volumes and others. So we can focus on that core competency of ours. So the end result to the customers, right? Whether it's a retail customer, it's a telco customer, it's an AI startup that wants to focus on their core competency of focusing on AI analytics and delivering the next generation of retail experiences, we're able to consume this programmable fabric from Equinix and deliver compute via the richness of the Kubernetes Cloud API and drive all these end use cases, such as the retail use case, the 5G use case, the CDN edge use case, or the AI use case. And that wouldn't be possible if we didn't have a programmable fabric like Equinix. And this is also why it goes back to, do users need to run Kubernetes clusters in the cloud, or with something like Equinix Metal, can they essentially treat the cluster as the cloud? And it happens to be running on bare metal and gives them a lot of richness and flexibility that you may not get outside of a framework like Equinix Metal. And that's the reason I think we have joint customers who are doing this today with us. And our teams love Equinix because it gives us a great fabric to build on top of and deliver the next layer of experience on top.
Narayan, you were talking about the next generation of developers to simplify their workflow. Can you define who would you call the next generation of developers? And then also if you can talk about how are you leveraging Equinix Metal to kind of enable that?
I'd echo what Sirish is saying. First of all, having that infrastructure is critical. And the second piece of that is that what Equinix is providing is this great vanilla Kubernetes experience. It's undoctored. It doesn't have, the thing about Kubernetes is almost living on that original promise of Java, which was write once, run everywhere. And if you need to run something regardless of geolocation, regardless of jurisdiction, and you need that reliability. You're getting that from Equinix. And now with the partner ecosystem, one of the challenges for app developers, or at least even vendors, ISVs like me, if there's a gap in a solution, you don't have a solution. The solution comes from mixing what Mohan has with what Sirish has with what we have, and now you actually get something that you can actually run and build your applications on. So there is this notion, I believe, if you look at the Kubernetes ecosystem, there are about 100,000-ish attendees at KubeCon, maybe according to the CNCF, a little over 1 million developers. It's growing rapidly. I believe the last report was 47%. But how is it going to reach that developer who's writing Node.js applications, is a Python developer, cannot learn the cloud stack, the Kubernetes stack, load balancers? Kubernetes and its ecosystems is like a collection of Lego blocks, but each Lego blocks has its own 50-page manual that you want to read, and that gets very daunting. And as an app developer, as a microservice level and so on, you're already having to build expertise in your domain, which is the application stack, or if you're front end and so on and so forth. So, Kubernetes is going to be used by pretty much everybody at some point because it is so ubiquitous in its capabilities, and we need to help bridge that gap to that. That's where the growth is going to come. So that's where we're coming in, and with Equinix and the partner ecosystem, helping reach that broader group. And as I think Mohan alluded, the cloud almost becomes like a utility in the sense that it just needs to work. It's pervasive, and you get to experience it as an app developer.
Mark, after listening to all these stories, of course, Kubernetes does not need anybody's help. It is growing at its own pace. But I do feel that Metal is playing a very critical role in adoption of Kubernetes in many use cases. So how do you see, what is your role in the Kubernetes ecosystem?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things we do there. I mean, obviously, we've got this huge focus on Kubernetes container management partners, and that's for a pretty simple reason, as was just alluded to. Like, most new products are going to end up on Kubernetes. Most re-engineered products are going to be at least looking at Kubernetes. So we think it makes a lot of sense for us. Most people, I can't be very clear on the statistics here without doing a bit of research, but I think, a lot of people come to Equinix Metal and they want to run either VMs on top of bare metal, or they want to run containers on top of bare metal. That's it. Now, occasionally they're also just running things directly on bare metal. So enabling those two, and then maybe starting to look forward as well into some of the exciting stuff that's happening in hyperconverged infrastructure again, means that we've got that strong foundation. Now, one of the other things we do is we have an open source program run by Ed Mehdi, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's around about $1 million a year of free hardware goes to the CNCF. And of course, this is a win for both of us, because most of the CNCF projects build natively on our machines because that's where they're building them. But also it means that they don't have to have that infrastructure burden. And often if you're just doing builds all day, every time a pull request comes in, having a really powerful bare metal machine is going to be a lot faster than using something virtualized. So there's that, and then I don't know, it seems like so much we do is around cloud native, but they're the two real specific programs that I'm thinking of right now, apart from just our general involvement with the CNCF.
Sirish, I'll come back to you. You talked about 5G, you talked about Edge, you talked about a lot of other use cases. If I ask you, are there certain use cases where you felt that, hey, we could not have done this without Equinix Metal? I mean,
there's some customers that we have jointly. The retail analytics AI startup comes to mind, where their business model essentially, I think, is not viable without a solution like Platform 9's Kubernetes stack on top of Equinix Metal. So let me explain why, right? So they were running on Amazon. They're a small startup. And, AI in Amazon, AI is very GPU intensive. GPU resources are expensive in Amazon. They're also hard to find. The supply issues, capacity mismatches, and so forth. So they had to go kind of find a more efficient way to kind of consume GPUs. So they had to go and find like a place where they could get access to GPUs more efficiently. And a place like Equinix Metal is a perfect candidate for a use case like that. But then they're a small startup and they don't have a lot of, they want to focus their team and their precious time on engineering on their core competencies, which was AI analytics for the retail industry, applied AI. And running Kubernetes, their whole team could just be spending time trying to run Kubernetes, right? Like, they're not in the Kubernetes business. We're in the Kubernetes business. We make that super simple and easy. So it's very remarkable to me that their founder and CEO said to our team that, look, essentially, if it wasn't this option to run get this Kubernetes cloud experience, but on bare metal, we wouldn't have a business. We wouldn't exist today because we would have basically shut shop because we're upside down in Amazon. We couldn't make the economics work. I think that's one example. I think if you talk more broadly about bare metal, I would just go look at the whole 5G ecosystem and say there's a massive, essentially millions of nodes that are going to come online and all running Kubernetes because that entire industry and the supply chain is transforming to containers. It's actually a very large industry outside of the generic, broader, horizontal enterprise use cases that a lot of which actually happens in the public cloud. I think that the 5G industry in particular is very, very significant because of the sheer scale and size that they have. And I think almost 100% of that is going to be running on bare metal. It makes no sense to be paying the virtualization overhead, especially for demanding network function, containerized network function workloads. They have latency requirements, they have performance requirements, they have throughput requirements. There's CapEx involved, the more hardware you need to deploy on site, the more CapEx you have to deal with, the more OpEx you have to deal with. So the economics of bare metal, I think, absolutely shine in a use case like that. And one, obviously, where Platform 9 is doing a lot of work. And we're going to continue investing in a great product experience there.
Mark, how do you see these use cases, especially edge? We talked about it earlier so many times in so many discussions. And here, when I talk about edge, we're not talking about small IoT devices. We're talking about edge data centers, which may be just resource-constrained devices or resource-constrained data centers at the edge. So from Equinix Metal's perspective, how do you look at these use cases?
Yeah, I mean, edge is very important to us, right? So we have the metro concept, and you find that a lot of our data centers are basically within major metros. Another thing that's been done by broader Equinix is, I believe the news went out on Friday about a new specifically focused 5G testing facility in the States. So this is something that we're investing in a lot. And I think, you can sort of touch it from a metal point of view, but you can also touch it from a fabric point of view. And how we bring those together, I think like Sirius said, is still emerging a little bit as we start to see the use cases come out. But I know that one of the things that we've been very busy with is the Linux Foundation's Edge Foundation. I think it's called Edge Foundation. And, we created something called the State of the Edge Report in 2017 and now donated that to that foundation. And so that's something that we're using to stay very close to this industry. And as the as the use cases start to emerge, I think we're seeing some changes in how we architect our tooling to support that.
Mohan, can you share some of the use cases where you see that it was not possible to do without Equinix Metal's partnership?
Perhaps maybe a good way to describe this is maybe take a real-life customer use case, which is a recent one. So the particular problem, the challenge they had was they had to start moving fast. Gone are the days when you can wait for a year to build something out and plan for 2 years to launch an application. People need to get these done in weeks or days these days. We have a customer who wanted to achieve that. Of course, their application was optimized for bare metal environments, and the key tenet for them was programmability. Right, so they cannot wait for bare metal equipment to be bought. And you guys all know we're living in COVID times. Supply chain is all messed up, right? By the time they can order hardware in the data centers and all of that, it's just they're going to be dead in the water. So a programmable way to consume infrastructure, and not just in some weird data center in a place where their users are not there. They wanted the flexibility to move around, right? So something like Equinix Metal was extremely well suited for them because they could just literally consume this via APIs, right? All they had to do was tweak their pipelines, deployment pipelines, and infrastructure would come up in the right location. But it's not just the infrastructure for these Kubernetes clusters on bare metal that come up. They also need the backhauls. The backhauls are really important because applications need data. It's so what if I have a data center, but I can't get my data there, then there's no use. So the combination of having a programmable, consumable environment closer to users with a fantastic backhaul because the networking at scale, the interconnects are really important. That combination is what is compelling many of these enterprises to kind of reconsider, like how do they augment their existing data centers, or maybe they even use public clouds today, but this is surrounded by these services that they run all over. Why? They want to deliver great experiences for the users, right? Whether it's a consumer or an enterprise, we come to expect world-class experiences, a consumerization, like the experience you get through a Gmail, or like instant access to stuff. That's kind of what we see happening.
Excellent, thanks. Now, Narayan, same question for you. From Code Zero's perspective, can you share some use cases where Equinix Metal played a critical role there?
Definitely, and I echo the same thing. I believe the expectation now as an application developer is how dynamic you need your environment to be. So the fact that Equinix Metal is fully programmable through their APIs, we were able to programmatically set up clusters in various jurisdictions on demand where needed, and to be able to shift the loads around. And the level of dynamism is not just, I need a cluster here, I need a cluster there. And then with Code Zero, your developer workstation, what we enable is you can literally attach your developer workstation to those clusters for in-flight development. So some people liken what we do to be able to fix a jet engine mid-flight. And when you get to that level of expectation as an application developer, if you're having an issue in production or having an issue that you are not able to see because, look, it's working on my computer, it's not working in the production environment, I need an exact replica, and I need it really quickly. Like Facebook just had an outage on Monday. It's typically has to do with the fact that one environment doesn't match another environment. So if you can actually, through programmatic means, be able to instantly replicate that and then try to get to what conditions are happening in production that you're not having locally, you need your entire infrastructure to be able to be brought up without any manual intervention and so on and so forth. So we're seeing a lot of those type of use cases and enabling that through our tooling. And that's where it works really well for us.
Narayan, Mohan, Sirish, and of course, Mark, thank you so much for taking time out today and creating an excellent panel. I love the discussion. And of course, I would love to have you folks back on the show. Thank you.